Hey guys, Zane here with another one take review, and today I wanted to talk about the Stooges as Raw Power. Although their self-titled debut album is arguably their most famous due to iconic tracks like I Wanna Be Your Dog being featured on it, the argument that often happens within the Stooges' fan base between what their best album is generally fought against the Stooges' Funhouse as well as Raw Power. Although Funhouse is arguably their most accomplished album, Raw Power definitely gives it a run for its money. As always, the Stooges' work on Raw Power is defined by none other than frontman Iggy Pop, who is easily one of the most energetic people to ever front punk bands in the history of ever, really. The definitely destructive and chaotic way in which he delivers his vocals is the epitome of everything that early punk and proto-punk was supposed to be from a vocal standpoint. The somewhat antagonistic persona that Pop often embraced during his live performances very infamously is greatly translated to the studio, something that's very impressive, as one would easily assume that's impossible or at the very least extremely difficult to do, but Iggy Pop does it without a single trip. The sexuality-influenced insanity that Pop manages to deliver just behind the mic on this record, and across all three of the Stooges' first three records, of course, but primarily Raw Power, is incredibly impressive, and just goes to show why he's actually somewhat of a cultural icon to this very day. Sure, you might see somebody like Joey Ramone or Johnny Rotten being listed before Iggy Pop in a greatest punk vocalists or frontman of all time list, but at the same time, Iggy Pop just had a level of destructiveness about him and a persona that is wholly unique, and especially for the time period unique, that definitely makes him stand out not only on Raw Power, but throughout the entirety of the Stooges' original run of 3 albums in their discography. Iggy Pop also produced and ultimately engineered Raw Power, which is arguably the most polarizing aspect of Raw Power to the Stooges' fanbase. Pop's production and mixing style saw him only use 3 different channels, one for his vocals, one for the guitar work, and one for literally everything else that they use, from drums and bass to all of these secondary instruments that they occasionally bring in for a song or two. This ultimately results in a somewhat lo-fi sound that ultimately, understandably, drives away a lot of people from enjoying Raw Power in the same way that they do their previous 2 records. I mean, obviously, it was early punk music. Of course, it was lo-fi. It had to be lo-fi because there was no way anyone was really funding this with a ton of money or anything like that. But Raw Power especially sounds low fidelity in terms of its actual sound. However, I find that this particular style of production adds to the overall rawness and general insanity of the record in the first place. There's a sense of grittiness that defines Raw Power and it is enhanced by the lo-fi sound. Now, there is a much more, or at least equally famous David Bowie remix, or I guess you could say remix, of Raw Power that came out in later years. I can't remember exactly what year that it did, but it's generally looked back on as the superior version of Raw Power as a record. Now, the David Bowie remix wasn't bad by any means. It was quite great. It was punchy but still smooth around the edges, that it was just overall a very enjoyable listening experience. And sure, maybe it's something you can enjoy more casually than the original Iggy Pop mixes, but at the same time, despite the perfections of David Bowie's remix, I think that the imperfections and the lack of about production and mixing that Iggy Pop really brought to the table when he mixed Raw Power originally are ultimately what make for such an amazing experience. So overall, the David Bowie mix is great, but the Pop mix just kind of delivers more of the off-the-wall craziness that listeners are promised to expect. Instrumentally, Raw Power is probably only behind Funhouse as the Stooges' most instrumentally intense album. Bassist Ron and drummer Scott Ashton, the 2 Ashton brothers that make up half of the Stooges, are about as solid of a rhythm section that you could ask for this kind of sound. Obviously, they don't blow anybody away with the way they perform. Neither of them are very distinguished or unique or really definitive in terms of punk bassists or drummers, but at the same time, they do solid work, and that's truly all you can really ask for from the Stooges. Meanwhile, the guitar work of James Williamson is actually almost as essential as Iggy Pop's vocal work, though nobody ever really talks about it. from the riff-like, shred-like chaos of songs like Your Pretty Face Is Going to Hell to his riffing over the corrupt bluesy stomp of I Need Somebody, Williamson is a very underrated performer that still to this day, even in a more positive retrospective look at the Stooges' music, doesn't get nearly enough credit. And look, the Stooges are often referred to as Iggy and the Stooges for a good reason. Iggy Pop is the defining member of this band. They would be half as good without him. But at the same time, the instrumental 3/4 of the group are still extraordinarily important to the sound that ultimately defined what are easily one of the most important punk bands of all time. Depending on who you ask, the Stooges are even the first punk band of all time. I mean, they're wrong because the Sonics existed, but still, people think that. So overall, Raw Power is an excellent album that really just has intense performances, especially from Iggy Pop and James Williamson, with some strong instrumentals and, generally speaking, a sense of insanity that you would expect from the band, really just dialed up to an 11. I'm going to give Raw Power 4.5 stars out of 5. My one take on Raw Power is that this is deservedly a classic album with a destructive attitude and a massive presence that understandably leaves people wondering whether this or Funhouse is the better record overall. So again, 4.5 stars out of 5, and with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.